Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
This episode is part 2 of a 3-part series on the staff interview and hiring process. We're getting into the nitty-gritty, blow by blow, going over how to find people who might be a good fit, how to structure your interviews, what red flags to look for so that you could potentially pick the person who is the best fit for whatever position you're looking to fill in your practice. A lot of what I'm going to be going over with you is much of the same stuff that we cover with MGE clients on the MGE Power Program. I'll put a link to that on the episode webpage. Now, if you missed last week's episode, part 1, I'd strongly suggest you go back and listen to it prior to this one. Now, if you're like me, I have trouble listening to people. You may just bull through this, which is fine. You won't be completely lost, but you may miss out on a few things as I refer back to them. And last point before I jump into things, as a disclaimer, I am not an employment attorney. And employment law varies wildly state to state in the United States. And if you're outside the United States, there's even more variance. So it's good to have an employment attorney you can talk to. And nothing I say constitutes legal advice, and we, of course, expect that you'd rely on the appropriate advisor to ensure you stay within the letter of the law in your municipality. All right, so with that, let's jump into it. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And I mentioned in last week's episode that there were 4 big picture boxes I'm looking to check with an applicant when I'm hiring them. They are, first one is the applicant's emotional tone level, which I explained in last week's episode, along with providing an easy technique to use to gain insight into the prospect's emotional tone level or their position on the tone scale, or emotional tone scale, rather. Number 2, the applicant's ability to produce, as shown by prior positions. Number 3, determining if the applicant is qualified for the position. They're licensed. Do they want it? There's no major red flags, which we're going to discuss in this week's episode. And number 4, ensuring that there are no major barriers to being able to perform the position. The position isn't Tuesday through Saturday and they can't work Tuesdays, or the position requires travel every other week and they can't travel. And of course, there are other points I look at or go into, which I'm going to discuss in this episode, but these are the 4 big picture points. So last week we went over the emotional tone scale, which leads us into point number 2. Can the applicant produce? When we say produce, what do we mean? Can they get a product? And can they get a viable amount of product? So for example, if I'm hiring a financial coordinator and they tell me how great of a financial coordinator they are, and they tell me how busy they were at their last job, and then I find out at their last job, they tell me they were working 60 hours a week at their last job, but they had 99% collections. That sounds great, right? But let's say for those 60 hours a week they're working, that practice collected $30,000 a month. So if you're familiar with this stuff, obviously, if you have to work 60 hours a week to collect $30,000 a month, that's not very efficient. So maybe parts of it sound good, but the level or viability level, the ability to sustain that position is not very good. Or you have a receptionist to tell you how great of a receptionist they were, and they max out at handling 10 calls a day. Okay, so we're looking for somebody who can produce at an adequate high level. Now, remember, you are never going to know 100% how productive somebody is ultimately until you work with them. So the whole idea here is, how can you check on their ability to produce so that you're at least somewhat sure before you then move to the next step, which is having them come to work with you, where you're going to ultimately establish whether they're productive or not. Well, in order to figure this out, you first have to know what a product is. And this concept of product is useful beyond just the hiring process. It's useful for training staff and getting staff to become more productive. And to that end, if you want to just try this, I challenge you to go up to your staff today, not all of them, maybe individually, and ask them, okay, what is your product? And you'll hear all kinds of things. I answer the phone, I schedule patients, or I fill the schedule, I assist the doctor, I collect money, or I'm the hygienist, right? You're going to hear all of this. And while it sounds good and your staff member's heart is in the right place, they actually don't know what their product is by definition. So let's define it. Now, this definition comes from the Hubbard management system developed by L. Ron Hubbard. If you're familiar with MGE, you know that a large portion of our curriculum comes from the Hubbard management system. And without going to a long explanation about it, Mr. Hubbard's works on management are expansive. I don't know if that's a big enough word. Millions of words covering every subject relating to organization, including sales, communication, financial planning, efficiency, stat management, strategic planning. I mean, I could go on. It's a ton. So how does Mr. Hubbard define a product? Well, we have two definitions. Let me give you the first one. Definition 1, a completed thing that has exchange value within or outside the activity. So a completed thing that has exchange value within or outside the activity. So when we say exchange value, what do we mean by exchange? It's the giving of something valuable in the return or in return for something valuable. If I go to the store and I buy a bottle of water and I give them, I wish I would give them only $1. I think it's probably $5 now. But I give them whatever I give them, that's an exchange. I gave them money, valuable money, they gave me valuable water. All right? So a completed thing that has exchange value within or outside the activity. So what's an example of a product? Well, there's this microphone I'm recording on right now. Some company made this microphone. I can't see the brand because I have one of those, guards and the little, I think they call it a spit guard or whatever they call it. I'm not spitting on my microphone, but you get the idea. They have one of these guards in front of it. So somebody made this microphone. We paid whatever we paid for this microphone. We exchanged that money in return for the microphone. This is a product. If I go buy a can of Coke, same thing. If I buy a car, same thing. The phone or tablet you may be listening to this podcast on, same thing. Someone made that phone. You gave them money. They gave you a phone. It was exchanged. That was a product. All right? And keep in mind, completed is the key word. Completed is the key word. So if I bought this microphone and it didn't work because it was missing a component, it's not a completed thing, is it? And I paid money for it, I'm just going to be an upset consumer. Same thing if you prepped a crown but only left the patient with the temp and never delivered the full crown. That wouldn't be a product. It's not completed. All right? All right, so then we have definition number 2. So what's this definition? It's a bit more comprehensive here. It says, a product is a finished, high-quality service or article in the hands of the person or group it serves as an exchange for a valuable. That's a product. Read that again. A product is a finished, high-quality service or article in the hands of the person or group it serves as an exchange for a valuable. That's a product. That's from Mr. Hubbard. So let's unpack this. You'll notice from this last definition, there are 4 points he makes in here. Okay? So number 1, it has to be finished, meaning it's done, meaning, the completed crown, the microphone that works, the Coke can that's properly sealed and has Coca-Cola in it. It's finished. Number 2, it's high quality. It's a high quality service or article, a thing or a service. And it's high quality. It's not shoddy quality. It doesn't break when I start to use it. And number 3, it's in the hands of the person or group it serves. And number 4, as an exchange for a valuable. So let's compare this to a few things here, just so you can kind of think with this. Like I said, this has a power beyond just hiring. As a matter of fact, that we use it in hiring is more incidental. Its major application would be in training staff to know what their product is so that all other actions are geared towards attaining that product. But we're using it for hiring to detect who can produce, right? All right, so let's say with a crown. You prep the crown, you complete the crown, it's seated, there's no upper margins, it looks beautiful, the patient's bite is great, it's delivered in their mouth, and remember that last part, as an exchange for a valuable, you got paid. So if any of those things are missing, that crown is not a product. If you leave an open margin, if the patient's left wearing a temp and the crown's not delivered, not a product. If you don't get paid, it's not a product. You may have prepped and delivered a beautiful crown, one of the best crowns that have ever been prepped, but if you didn't get paid, by definition, it's not a product. If a car manufacturer makes a bunch of cars and they're sitting on the lot and no one's buying them, it's not in the hands of the person or group it serves, it's not a product. Or if someone steals the car, they didn't exchange a valuable, it's not a product. So it has to meet those 4 conditions. Finished, high quality, service or article in the hands of the person or group it serves as an exchange for a valuable. You can apply this to anything. You can even apply it internally within your office, meaning every position in your office has one or more products associated with it. So let's take, for example, if you have somebody who handles your schedule. Now, you might call this person a schedule coordinator, a receptionist, or my favorite, a front desk, like you're naming them after the furniture they sit behind, which is great. I guess you'd call me a desk right now. So what does the scheduler do? They schedule patients, and they get the patient to show up. And who do they deliver that patient who's shown up in the practice to? They deliver that to the dental assistant who brings that patient to the doctor, or they deliver that patient to the hygienist. So that product is actually being exchanged internally. They're taking it, they get it, they give it to the hygienist or the doc. And in exchange for that, what do they get for getting that product? They get paid. They get to be part of the team. That's how that works. So if you had someone scheduling, and like think this through for a second. Let's say they're scheduling a lot of patients, but you end up with 50% no-shows. Okay? Well, they could tell you, well, I've been working really hard. I scheduled all these patients. I confirmed all these patients, but half of them didn't show up. They didn't deliver the goods, yet you're expected to pay the same amount. It's kind of an interesting way of thinking, isn't it? If you think about this, when you have any employee, it's just the viewpoint that I would take. If I'm hiring somebody, they're supposed to deliver a certain product, whatever the product of their job is. In exchange for that, they get paid. They get to be part of the team. So if they produce a lot or they produce well, they get promoted, right? Because they're becoming more and more valuable to the organization. If I have somebody and they're not producing at all, and I'm having to pay them the same amount as somebody else who produces more, that's kind of a losing proposition. This is why you have statistics. Statistics measure products. That's the whole point. Like I would never keep a statistic on number of hours worked because how long somebody works has zero to do with how many products they get. We've all seen this. You could have somebody who, works 8 hours and produces 3 to 4 times more what somebody else produces. So really, this is the easiest way to think with and manage. And you know where they do this pretty frequently? Not that I want to get into this on the podcast too much of pro sports. If you want to get paid, you got to produce. You have stats. They're measured. And if you're producing, you get big money. If you're not producing, you get cut. You may not even be picked up by another team. So that's basically all statistics are. It measures products, okay? But keep in mind, a product isn't just something that a business or organization sells to the consumer. Products are exchanged internally within the organization. Let's say I'm your receptionist, and my job is to schedule new patients, right? So you're doing the marketing, and it's generating a ton of phone calls. You would expect me to convert a considerable number of those, a good number of those, into new patients if I'm doing a good job. And it wouldn't just be, oh, we had 50 phone calls and I scheduled 40 people. Who cares how many I schedule? And we care. But really what's most important is, do we see those people? And this is a case where statistically small products add up to a bigger product. If you wanted to see how many new patients you're going to get, you would first look at, well, how many calls did we get? Okay, how many did we schedule? Because you'd have an expectation that if you schedule them, for the most part, they're going to show up. But the ultimate reveal is, does the person actually show up? That's sort of the big deal. That's the final product there that we're looking for. So every job has its related products. And it may have smaller products that add to the bigger products on the job. Like one of the products of a receptionist would be a properly routed phone call. It goes to the proper person at the proper time, the proper way it was supposed to go. If I'm your financial coordinator, what product would you expect? I'd collected all funds for services rendered. If I were a cook, what would you expect? Food that tastes good and was worth paying for at the correct speed and volume. If I spent 3 hours making a meal that really should only take 20 minutes, that's not the level of product we're looking for. A salesperson, what are we expecting? Closes. So when you're interviewing somebody, you're always looking at their work history. You want to try to determine if this person has potentially verifiable past production. Okay, that's basically what we're looking for. So you might say to me, well, Jeff, how am I supposed to figure out if this person wasn't in the dental industry, what product or products they were supposed to get at their last job when I'm asking about their last position? Well, I'm going to give you another little piece of data here from Mr. Hubbard that kind of gives you a little bit more insight into how you can think with just a product in general. This isn't difficult to do, so let me read this to you. And it has to do with something he referred to as the 3 conditions of existence. So here's what he says. There are 3 conditions of existence. They are be, do, and have. The first condition of existence is being. Being is defined as the assumption of a category of identity. It could be said to be the role in a game. An example of beingness could be one's own name. Another example would be one's profession. Another example would be one's physical characteristics. Each or all of these things could be called one's beingness. Beingness is assumed by oneself, or given to oneself, or is attained. For example, in the playing of a game, each player has his own beingness. All right, so we have our first condition, be, or beingness. You know, you're a dentist. That's a beingness, okay? You might also be a mom or a dad. That's also a beingness. Let's move on to the next one. We have do. The second condition is doing. By doing, we mean action, function, accomplishment, the attainment of goals, the fulfilling of purpose. So as Mr. Hubbard here says, we have be and do so far. So doing is the actual, you're a dentist, what do? You do dentistry. Okay, if you're a baker, you bake, right? If you're a parent, you parent. All right, let's move on to our third one. The third condition of existence is havingness. By havingness, we mean owning, possessing, being capable of commanding. All right, so we have be, do, have. Beingness, doingness, havingness. You know, I have a suit that I'm wearing. That's havingness, right? It's something that I own or possess, or I don't really command it. It's a suit, right? But it's something that I own or possess. Now, he goes on to say here, the game of life demands that one assumes a beingness in order to accomplish a doingness in the direction of havingness. So, let's take the baker for a second. So we have the beingness of a baker. There's many things that go into the beingness of the baker. The training the baker has, the ethics level the baker has, how professional and attentive to detail the baker is, you know, the training the baker has that they can actually use or implement. These are all part of the baker's beingness. And they also have the title, let's say he or she has the title of baker. What does the baker do? The baker bakes. They bake cakes and bread and this and that, whatever. What does the baker have after baking? Well, what's produced? A cake, you know, a donut, a loaf of bread. So we have the beingness of the baker, the doingness of the baker, the havingness of the baker. You have a dentist, they have the beingness of the dentist. Again, ethics level, perfection level, training level, education, etc. The dentist does whatever dentistry they're doing. They're prepping veneers, let's say. That's a doingness. And then what's the end? We end up with a havingness, which is the completed veneers that look beautiful and the patient is excited about. Be, do, have. And it's interesting, if there was something off with the beingness with the dentist, maybe, the dentist is just placing implants, but they're not very certain about their ability to place implants or how to keep them from failing. Maybe they're missing some pieces of their education or something like this, and then they place the implant, but they place it incorrectly, then the implant fails. We don't have the havingness of a completed implant. Do you see? So, last point on this, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with finding the product, but I thought it'd be interesting to share because we're talking about be, do, and have. What are most of us asked when we're children? We're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, we say the usual. I want to be a fireman, an astronaut, a teacher, a dentist, whatever we say, a doctor, a lawyer. The kids who say they want to be a lawyer. Anyway, well, Mr. Hubbard comments on this, and it's pretty interesting. He says, if we ask children, what do you want to produce in life? We could probably get a workable answer. From that, they could figure out what they'd have to do to produce that. And from that, they could know what they had to be. Then with a little cooperation, they'd be able to lead a happy and valuable life. Concentrating on be, one finds them ready to be all right, but then they stand around for the next 50 years waiting for their havingness to fall out of the sky. So just an interesting take there with kids, because you have some kid and they go, okay, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lifeguard. Okay, cool. And then they're a lifeguard and they wonder why they don't have a 20,000 square foot house and 2 Ferraris, because lifeguard jobs don't pay that much, right? It's funny because, again, I was making a lawyer joke there a minute ago, but I remember early on in my life, I was definitely pushed towards law. That was, the area I was supposed to get into. And, you always think of law as this glamorous thing, from all the TV shows and whatnot. I remember talking to my lawyer once at 9 o'clock at night, and she was still at her office and telling her how she's shattering my illusion of how glamorous it was to be a lawyer, from watching Perry Mason or whatever. It's just kind of funny. So people get this idea of what they want to be, but they don't necessarily associate it with what they eventually want to have. So as Mr. Hubbard says, if we ask children, what do you want to produce in life, we could probably get a workable answer. Anyway, so back to this. We have be, do, and have. We have our baker who is a baker. They bake and they make cakes. Which one of these things is the product? based on the definition of product I gave you a few minutes ago? Being the baker, baking, or the cake? Now, you probably just said the cake or the bread or whatever it is the baker's supposed to bake, and you're correct. The product is the have. The product is the have. But now let's compare that to how most personnel interviews go. So, you're interviewing me and you're looking at my resume and you go, okay, Jeff, I see you were in sales here. Your position was VP sales. Okay, good. What were your responsibilities? Well, I was in charge of sales. I sold stuff. I made sure people were selling things. Of course, I'd hopefully be a little bit more, eloquent as I'm saying it. You go, okay, great. And what did you do? Well, I used to travel for, conventions, and I did this and I did this and I did that. So we've asked about my B, my title, and my do. We haven't talked about the have, my product at all. And then you go to my next position. Okay, and I see here you were the chief executive here at so-and-so place. And what were your responsibilities? I have a friend in the personnel industry who's familiar with this technology. He refers to these as do-be-do interviews. Okay? That's how they go. So what we want to do here with this product concept in mind, we're trying to figure out, does this person have a history of production, okay, in past positions? Again, we're not going to be guaranteed that they're going to be able to produce for us, but we want to see that they have a history of production, because if they do, there's a pretty darn good chance they'll be able to produce for us, and we've eliminated a lot of chance here. So how do we check past production? I mean, if they have statistics that they brought with them, great, right? But even if they don't, because most people don't, it's not the end of the world. Well, here are some examples I could give you. Let's say I'm talking to somebody who worked in a dental office or a medical office, and they were a front desk person, which means they were probably one of 3 or 4 people who all did a little bit of everything, the same things. So how am I going to determine if this person's productive or not? Well, let's start asking the questions like, how many people would you schedule per day for an appointment? What else? I'd ask them what their responsibilities were. Well, I did walkout statements. I did this. I did that. I did insurance verifications. Okay, good. How many insurances would you verify in a given day? How many patients would you check out in a given day? How many patients would you schedule in a given day? What was your percentage of appointments kept? Like, I'm trying to turn whatever actions they're describing that they did into a definable real thing that occurred in the physical universe. Now, one thing about this, let's say I ask them that, well, how many patients would you check out in a given day? And the person says, I don't know. Well, you have a rough number, ballpark? No, I don't remember. Was it less than 5, more than 5? I don't remember. That's probably a big waving blood red flag for me, because the person is not production orientated at that point. Let's say it's a financial person from another practice, either dental practice, medical practice, or whatever. Maybe they just did collections for business. I would ask them things like, okay, you did collections, great. What was your collection volume per month? Ballpark. Okay, good. Okay, what was your collections percentage? Again, if the person's, I have no idea what my collection percentage was, red flag. If they go, well, I collected about $120,000 a month, my collection percentage was 98%. Okay, well, I have a quantifiable product there, don't I? Now, here's the beautiful thing about this, and it won't pan out in every case, but you're going to eventually call for references on this person, which I'd suggest, we'll get into this in next week's episode. But I'm going to call for references on this person. I can ask about this. Hey, so I was interviewing Susie here, and Susie said that she used to collect about X amount of dollars per month, and her collection percentage was 98%. What if the person I'm talking to says, yep, that's absolutely correct? Well, that's a big, that's great. Big check mark for Susie. Well done. What if the person says, oh, no, she collected closer to 75%? Well, that's a big red flag, okay? Because most of the time when you call for references, and again, I'm going to talk about this more in depth next week, what are you going to get? Would you hire or not hire them again? Would you rehire? Why'd you leave? Why'd they leave? I can't talk about it. There's a way around this in the sense of, I want to find out if the person, what they're telling me they produced can be verified. I'm going to at least try. How about a dental assistant? Because it's always tough to staticize a dental assistant. There I could say, okay, how many procedures did you assist for in a given day? What part of these procedures were you responsible for doing? Okay, and what level of productivity was the doctor at? Like, I'm trying to get an idea, what was this person supposed to be creating? Because, how often have you hired an assistant who tells you, oh, I did this, I made temps, and then the first temp they make you looks like a chicklet or something like this, right? You go like, what is going on? And we're going to get into more about technical staff next week, because there's certain things I would definitely do there. But I'm trying to break down what this person did, the doingness, I first find out what the beingness is because that's on the resume. Then I'm going to turn that into what was their doingness and then turn that into some form of a havingness. What was the product? With a student, it's pretty simple. What were their grades? What projects were they responsible for and what did they make? What awards did they win? With a salesperson, that's even easier because what's a salesperson supposed to do? They're supposed to sell, right? They're supposed to close. So you could ask them, how much did you sell on an average week, month, or quarter? Now, in some cases, some businesses, people are selling really high ticket items. So I would want to place them somewhere within their organization. Because let's say I talk to somebody, and let's say my practice is doing $2 million a year, and I'm looking at this person as a potential treatment coordinator. They want to, they were going a bit too hard in their life and traveling too much, but they want a sales job and they want to stay close to home. So I'm talking to them and I'm going, okay, well, how much did you sell in a given year? Like, probably about $100 million. Right? Well, it sounds like a lot of money, doesn't it? I mean, but they were selling tanks, right? So tanks are expensive. So I would want to place them like, okay, maybe tanks was not a good example to bring up here. It just came off the top of my head. But I want to place them in the organization as far as how good of a salesperson was this person really? Because what if they were out of 100 salespeople, they were number 98? That's not necessarily so good. Like they sold 100 million a year, but number one sold 1 billion. Right? So I would want to see how they ranked amongst the people within their firm. Maybe they're number 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever. Again, then it depends on how many people there are. If there are 100 people, they're number 5, that's great. If there's 5 and they're number 5, not so great. Right? And again, as I'm asking them these questions, because you can do this with any job. You take a look at what the be, the do is, and then what would have been the have. You could pretty much envision that. Take any job. The person came from customer service industry. They handled customer service tickets with I was about to say patients, customers who called in on the phone, right? Okay. So then you go, okay, well, what did you do? Well, I took phone calls, I got customer complaints, and then I make sure that those complaints were resolved correctly. Okay, good. How many complaints would you get a day? Oh, I'd probably get about 40. How many of those did you resolve successfully in a given day? Oh, like 38. Okay, and how many of those do you have to escalate to? And was there any rating system that you were given based on, how good of a job you were doing? A lot of customer service jobs have some form of rating. You've probably been asked this before. Give me 5 stars if you really liked what I was doing. Well, my overall rating was 4.9. Okay, how did you rank amongst all the customer service representatives? I was always, in the top 5 out of 100. This person can produce. Or at least they ostensibly may be able to produce because they have some stats to back it up. Do you see? So the good thing, as I mentioned about this, when I get all this data, I possibly can use this when I'm checking references, and I'm getting the idea, A, if the person is production-oriented, and B, if they're not production-oriented, it's a red flag for me, but C, if they are, what type of production they were responsible for creating. So that's the product thing. That's a big thing for me. Can the person produce? What are some other things that I'm going to look for during the interview process? Well, one, there's a reason behind this. I'm not going to get into all the ins and outs as to why, just because of the platform I'm using here. It's not really conducive for to take another hour to explain why. But if somebody comes in and I'm interviewing about prior jobs that they had and they are hypercritical of previous employers, that is a big red flag for me. Why? I'm not going to get into it right here, but this is what I'm going to ask you just tell you that there's a reason, okay? If I ask somebody, because usually on most applications, it's going to say, what was your job? Because you, of course, usually have people fill out an application in addition to giving you a resume. What was your job and why did you leave, right? And let's say it says, why did we leave? We had a difference of opinion on something or didn't get along or it was time for me to go or some cryptic answer you might ask. So it says here you left because you had a difference of opinion. They go, yeah, let me tell you, my last employer, that guy was a scumbag, blah, 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 blah. And you might find out their last employer was Bernie Madoff, in which case, all right, we'll give them a buy on that one, right? But what if it's just they go off and it's not, there's a difference here. If I told you, yeah, me and my previous employer, we just didn't get along well, but that's fine. And he's doing good. He's got his own business. It just was not for me. Is that being hypercritical? No. That's just whatever, right? If I got into how terrible of a person they were and a liar and a thief and a scumbag and a this and that, whatever, number one, it just doesn't go over well with me. But number two, there's a reason a person gets that way, and it would be a red flag for me hiring them. So that's one thing I do look for. Next thing is at some point in my interview, I'm going to ask them what their goals are work-wise, not intruding in their personal life, but what are their career goals? What are they looking to do here with their career? There's 2 reasons for this. One, I want to get an idea of how ambitious this person is. And, lack of ambition isn't always it's not a deal killer for me or it's not going to necessarily end the conversation, depending on the position. If I'm looking to hire somebody for a treatment coordinator position, I probably want somebody who's ambitious. Or if I'm looking to hire somebody and it's, we're in a rapid growth phase and I want people that can kind of move up within the organization and the person doesn't have a lot of drive or isn't very ambitious, that's a bit of a problem for me. I want somebody who's ambitious in that case. If I'm hiring somebody to do, file insurance part-time and they're not super ambitious, that's not that big of a deal, right? So that's one thing. I want to kind of gauge what this person's ambition is. Also, I want to get an idea of what their plan is here, because let's say I'm talking to somebody and I want to hire them as a dental assistant and they tell me, yeah, I want to, what's your career, your plan work-wise? Well, my husband is moving out of town in the next year. I want to move with him because I want to start a dental assisting school in, name the state, 5 states away. So then this person's only going to be there for a year. That could potentially be a problem where the person's going to school to become something completely different from what you do in your practice. They're going to school to become a paralegal, and you might ask them then, when are you looking at graduating? Well, it's in a year from now. Well, there's 2 things there. I'm not saying, again, that's a deal breaker, but you might have the assistant and they're there a year, right? Or they might be going to school to become a paralegal because they don't really have a good gauge on what they want to do with their life. And it ends up, they love becoming whatever they're doing in your practice. They become your treatment coordinator and they love that more and they stick with it and they get their paralegal training and they just don't become a paralegal. But, if the plan is a hard career path turn away from my business and it's happening in the near horizon, I have to really evaluate if this is a good hire for me. That really only depends on what the situation is. That's completely situational. If I'm comfortable with the person working for me for a year or 2 and then going on and I know I'm going to be back in the same boat rehiring again, then fine. If it's somebody that I'm hoping is going to stick around for a while, I may keep looking at that point. Or you might have somebody who's a dental assistant that's going to hygiene school, in which case, great. They get their hygiene license and then they flip from being an assistant to a hygienist. I've seen clients do that tons of times. But I want to get an idea of what their ambitions are and what their goals are work-wise to see how that's going to fit long-term with the practice. Now, they could be going to school for something that has nothing to do with my business, and I'm not going to ask them to quit or do something else because they don't know me from a hole in the ground, and we may work together 2 weeks and, don't want to work together anymore. But to me, that's not an out-qualifier, right? They come in, they work for a bit. This might be something they want to stick with. It's just something that I have to know is sort of the big puzzle. It's a puzzle piece in this big puzzle of who I'm going to hire, okay? Next issue, let's say you're hiring somebody and you go, okay, well, the position pays between 20 to 26 an hour, $20 to 26, or say 23 to 26. The average is 25. And this person says, oh, gosh, okay, well, I need at least $40 an hour to be able to pay my bills. But, the job market's real tough now, so I'm just going to take it. Now, you can't ask somebody, again, I'm not giving you legal advice, talk to your employment attorney, but you can't ask somebody, how cheap can I hire you for, right? Not something you'd want to ask anyway. But you're going to have a certain amount you're paying for a position. If I tell somebody the position pays, $50,000 a year, and they tell me, well, if I don't make at least $80,000 or $85,000, I'm going to go bankrupt, but I need a job, so I'm going to take yours. That to me is a bit of a problem. Now, will you know this about every applicant? No. You may say the job pays $25 an hour, and they say, great, but they really needed $40, in which case, okay, you can't ask them. But if you say it and they volunteer to you, oh, yeah, I need at least $40 an hour, or I need $85,000 a year, or I'm going to go bankrupt, then for me, that's a problem, because put yourself in their position for a second. You really need work, so you take this job that doesn't pay enough to pay the bills, but you can at least buy food, right? What are you going to be doing in the interim? Think about this. You're going to be getting a second job while you look for a job that pays you what you want to get paid. It's going to be a continuous problem. And it's a problem that I'm not saying I don't have empathy for that person, okay? I've had people like this that I would have hired in a heartbeat, and it just didn't fit. And remember the first time I encountered it, I actually called a friend who was looking for somebody with this person's particular skill set and did pay what they needed to get paid, sent them over there, and they got the job. Because, I had empathy for him. It's a mom, she had 2 kids, but I didn't want to have that situation. because I'm just, she has a problem and then that becomes my problem. Again, not that I don't have empathy, but I'd rather she solves it correctly and finds the job that's actually going to take care of her and her kids. Do you see? So in that case, the person volunteers it, they tell me that, and my job isn't going to be able to pay their bills. That's a bit of a problem for me. That's a red flag. Next one is one that was always a big red flag for me, which is job hopping, but it's become a lot more prevalent since 2020. The labor market got tight in 2020, so people were often going off and looking for greener pastures, right? They were in one job, then they heard about another job that paid more, so they'd go there. And it was the first time in my career I was seeing resumes with people, had this job for 3 weeks, this job for 2 weeks, this job for 2 months. Usually if someone had a job for 2 weeks, you're better off just not even putting it on your resume. I mean, you could just say you didn't have a job for those 2 weeks, right? But that would happen, right? And that became more of a thing since 2020. When someone is continuously job hopping, looking for greener pastures, and it's a pattern, they've never held any position for any length of time, that to me is a bit of a red flag. Now, if someone's moving semi-frequently every couple of years because they're married to somebody in the military and that person's getting stationed elsewhere, fine, whatever. That just happens. And, in some cases that works. In some cases that doesn't. It might be somebody, the 2-year horizon works for you. You might ask, when are you going to be moving again in 2 years? Okay, good. That works for you. Hire them. Okay. But the job hopping, like every 2 weeks, 2 months, this, that, the other, that's a bit of a problem for me. But like I said, I've seen a lot more of that since 2020, so keep that in mind. It shouldn't be as much of a problem now as it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So let's say you've interviewed somebody, you think their tone's pretty good, they've shown you that they have a history of production, they check all the little boxes that we've gone over, right? We still have a few last points that we need to check, which include references. And if it's a provider or technical staff member, a dental assistant, or an EFTA, there are a few additional questions that you're going to want to have. So in next week's episode, I'm going to cover all of this, these few last points you want to check. And this is assuming you have somebody who's checked all your boxes and you go, yeah, I'm really thinking about hiring them now. We're going to cover all that, along with how do you put this all together into a step-by-step interview process that you can use in your practice. So I hope this helps. I put that link to the MGE Power Program that I mentioned earlier on the episode webpage. And if you have any questions about this week's episode or any other questions, period, you can email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. And to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. We'll be coming back next week with part 3 that I just mentioned. That should conclude this series. But otherwise, folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.